Let me invite you to consider the sounds of Elul and their connection to a very important liturgy, poetry of our Machzor, the High Holidays prayer books we'll be praying with in only a couple of weeks. So the first sound is that of the shofar. We've been sounding it at the end of Shacharit each morning. I believe the central invitation it's making is to at least prepare the heart, if not to already engage in tshuva. We could also, during this month, put an extra layer of kedusha, of holiness, on an act that we may do every day of the year, wherever we have a tzedakah box. That is to give tzedakah and let each of the coins filter in, and sound of a few coins in a pocket falling into the tzedakah box itself. You know what it sounds like. Despite the fact that we might write generous checks to causes that we really care about, that act of giving a little bit of tzedakah daily, folding a bill or two, putting in a few coins into the tzedakah box, increases our capacity to be generous. And then, of course, there's the familiar sounds of prayer. I invite you to engage in just even one verse of prayer. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Prayer opens the heart, it focuses the mind, creates kavanah, intention towards bettering our lives, bettering our world, weighing possibilities and considering the holy words we need to use in our lives beyond the sacred chants and the sacred passages that we read. Of course, these three, the shofar with tshuva, the tzedakah box with tzedakah, the prayer we're engaged in, tefillah, those three words make up a central line in that very famous prayer from our Machzor, Unatana Tokef. You recall the line, Utshuva, Utfila, Utzedakah, Ma'avirin et Roa Hagazera. Now here's the translation. It's hard to translate these words. Tshuva and Tefillah and Tzedakah. They what? They transform the experience of what sometimes might be considered the harsh realities we face. It's not easy to translate tshuva, but we use the word repentance. And tefillah, we use the word prayer, but there's deeper dimensions to just praying a prayer, singing a liturgy, chanting a psalm. And tzedakah. That's righteous action, the giving of time, and especially the giving of charity, righteous giving. These three pursuits, these three dimensions of our lives of holiness truly transform the experience of this world, of a mortal world, a world sometimes overcome by suffering and sometimes overcome by poverty and sometimes overcome by injustice and sometimes overcome by evildoers. We have the ability, says the Paitan, the poet of that prayer in the Machzor, and the Torah itself, which offers these mitzvot every day, all year, we have the ability, though we are not immortal like angels, to truly make of our mortal lives a holy endeavor, to give life in this world new meaning, to use our precious resources and the gifts we've been blessed with to transform our lives and the lives of others. That's the point of repentance. That's the point of prayer. And today I'll particularly focus on tzedakah, so that during this month of Elul, we might take stock of where our investments, where our charitable investments are, and what we hope to see our tzedakah do in the world. Tzedakah is a concrete religious obligation. We take of our resources and we set to share what we can. While there are so many areas of Jewish life that have tzedakah codes written about them, and that offer us philosophical perspectives on mitzvot, it's important to understand the basic laws and the philosophical leanings of those codes which deal specifically with the mitzvah of tzedakah. It's that tack that I'll take today in exploring this mitzvah. Between 10 and 20% of available resources, God hopes we will give to tzedakah. This comes from a connection to this week's parsha, Ki Tavo, where if we read about the second generation in the wilderness inheriting the land, we learn that the very first act with the harvest, the fruit, the gifts that they were granted in the land, the very first act they would do with all those wonderful gifts after they've built their homes and established themselves and the agricultural systems that would sustain them, they would give a maser, a tenth of their harvests, to tzedakah. They would set aside the gifts they needed to tithe, and they would even bring them into the house and prepare special baskets. This, yes, is your inheritance. It is yours, a possession that I promised to your ancestors, God says. But when you take in the first of the fruits, Mereshit kol pri ha'adama, asher tavi me'artzecha, when you have those first fruits and they are in your possession, v'samta vatene, you'll put them in a special basket, a tzedakah basket. V'halachta el hamakom asher yivchar Adonai Elohecha. You'll go to the place that is holy and you will give that produce as tzedakah. This righteous giving helps define generations and generations of tzedakah for thousands of years now. Deuteronomy in chapter 26, where I just read from, describes the reason why we feel so inclined to be generous with all the gifts we receive. We were once slaves in Egypt. We were once afflicted. And now with hard work, though it's by our own hands, and it should be all ours, we're willing to share of the produce, share of the bounty that we have been blessed with. Yes, our own two hands were at work, but we recognize that God was an essential partner in this endeavor. And because we recognize God is a partner in this endeavor, we even realize that all we hold as our own, that the idea of possession is somewhat different than the idea of a slave owner owning a slave, or even the owner of a field owning the orchard, owning the crops. Philosophically, in Jewish thought, we are the stewards and the keepers of those fields of the Holy Land. We are those who enjoy the fruits of our labor and the fruits themselves. And yet we are responsible by law, by decree, obligated to give a certain percentage of that yield to those who serve the public, the poor, the widow, those who are on the margins of society and in need. That spiritual stewardship that we have creates in each of us the drive towards being giving and generous souls. And the more times we drop the coins into the tzedakah box, the more that generosity grows within us, and we're able to fulfill that obligation out of love and out of ahava, loyalty, and not out of yira, fear, or just because we know we have the obligation. First level of moving from tzedakah, that is, in terms of a Jewish tradition, a tzedakah of righteousness, as the root of the word connotes, tzedek, is going from a tzedakah of fear, and just because the code says so or the Torah commands it, to the tzedakah of ahava, to the tzedakah of love, the tzedakah of loyalty to God and others who are in need in the world. In another chapter of Deuteronomy, chapter 15, a verse from the Torah reads, Lo tikpotz et yadcha me'achicha ha'evyon. You shall not close your hand when it comes to your destitute brother. Now, this instruction is defining of what we would call a tzedakah imperative. And imagine this, says the Gaon of Vilna. When your hand is closed, everything looks equal. But when your hand is open, we see, quote unquote, some have less than others. This one's a little taller, this one's a little stronger, this one's a little thicker. This one's a little bit more fortified, this one's a little less. Open your hand towards your brothers and your sisters. The Torah is suggesting that we'll also have to resolve questions when it comes to the recipients of our tzedakah as well. When it comes to the quantity we should give, the Gemara instructs us, do not give more than a chumash. Do not give more than 20%. What a tall order to think that someone would commit that much funding. The Torah describes a maaser, tenth. But let's relate to the question of whatever amount of tzedakah that we can calculate in our minds. Let's ask this question. Are more tzedakah acts with less money better than fewer tzedakah acts with more money? Individual souls may have different answers when it comes to that question, but it's worth considering in this month of Elul. As we take a cheshbon hanefesh, the accountings of our soul, we're also taking a tzedakah accounting to fulfill the tzedakah imperative. Another question about our tzedakah. Is it better to give in one lane for one cause, even if it's to a variety of organizations that fight for that one cause that we're committed to? Or should we diversify into a few causes so that we're more conscious of the varying needs of humanity and our planet? For each soul, we'll have to figure out for which causes he or she would like to stand and to which to give. The Talmudic percentages that are suggested between 10 and 20% are there to be sure that a person, him or herself, does not join the ranks of the impoverished. Because we know about the reality that a person today could have so much, but tomorrow experience darker times. The questions about tzedakah continue. In the tradition, we may ask, are there ideal addresses to which I could give my tzedakah? One way of framing that question is, shall we give locally or globally? Shall we give, for instance, in New York City, in the United States, causes in Israel, other nations, to every continent on the globe? There's a famous principle that is explicated in Yoreh Deah, in the Shulchan Aruch, section 251. It says, prioritize Aniyei Ircha. The poor of your city come first. Aniyei Ircha Kodmim. Many believe that this is indeed the central operative principle in making any decisions about where the tzedakah should go. There are others, though, who notice that the word becha appears in Deuteronomy 15, verse 7. And that word, meaning within you or among you, could relate to Aniyei HaMishpacha, to your family members, and to those in your micro community. And that a person's tzedakah, yes, should be directed to good causes with good administrators, less overhead, and who put the funds to work in righteous ways. But that individual donors sometimes become the sources to lift up their brothers and sisters within a community and within a family, and that prioritizing those needs at the time of their needs is indeed kosher and even recommended. So shall we give in our city? The answer for us at Or Zarua is yes. We take hunger relief here in New York very seriously. Shall we give in Israel? For us at Or Zarua, the answer is yes. We often provide tzedakah to Leket. Shall we give to those in our own borough or beyond? Yes, we give to the Met Council, who make sure that our tzedakah is fanning out across the boroughs of New York City. Yes, we give to the New York Common Pantry so that it goes beyond the Jewish community. And hyper-local, Aniyei Ircha, to the poor of our city. To family and close friends, oftentimes, thankfully, through the generosity of so many at Or Zarua, I'm able to, as Rabbi of Or Zarua, give through my rabbinic discretionary fund to those who really are in need. People known to us who are in our family, and people just close to us who unfortunately have to come and ask sometimes because they've come on hard times. We'll continue to search for wonderful causes, to give our tzedakah and to do our parts. In a discussion about where we direct our tzedakah as a community, questions about which texts can help inspire us when it comes to taking the accounting of our tzedakah last year and into 5781 can be accessed through connecting with me and sitting and discussing this important mitzvah. I invite you anytime as I invite you now to take a spiritual assessment when it comes to those precious areas of spiritual pursuit that the Unatana Tokef prayer recommends we do. Tshuva, repentance. Tefillah, prayer. Tzedakah. May our righteous giving only increase, and may our sense that we are making life meaningful through our mitzvah pursuits truly come to inform the way that we make meaning in our lives and avert any sense that there is roa hagazera, that there's evil in the decree. Wishing you the powerful preparation for the High Holy Days that 5780 can provide.